If I could go back and talk to myself a day before I started in the VFX industry, there are a few things I'd tell myself, because I had to learn a few lessons the hard way, but maybe you don't have to. And not the technical stuff like which individual button to press, but the real stuff that helps shape a career. I've worked in the industry for over a decade across a multitude of studios, and there's a few good decisions that I made, and there's also some mistakes I made along the way too. So whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, this is the stuff that can help promote a healthy career. If I could go back and talk to myself a day before I started, these are the 5 things I'd tell myself. So let's start with point number 1. Be honest. I know when you're first starting out in the industry, there's a pressure to feel like you know everything, and I certainly felt it. I remember being in review sessions where I would get asked a technical question, and instead of just saying, look, I don't know, I kind of, nodded along and then went off and Googled the answer after the review finished. And to be honest, it didn't really help. If anything, it made me more anxious and worried about future jobs, because I was worried that I would be asked these questions, and if I didn't know the answer, then I didn't feel like I was a valuable employee. And over the years, this would happen sort of on repeat, and I always felt anxious and nervous about how to answer these questions. In one particular situation, I was freelancing at a studio, and although I was doing After Effects work for a graphic job, they knew that I had previously been a render wrangler, so I'd managed a render farm. And they asked me a really technical question about the render farm because they wanted to build their own. So they asked me something along the lines of, how many blades were you guys running in your previous farm, because we're thinking about buying one and we want to know what works. And honestly, although I was a render wrangler, I didn't know all the technical specifications of how the farm ran. I just kind of managed day-to-day operations of it and made sure that it wasn't bugging out. I didn't know the answer to this question. And I remember thinking, I have no idea. I know that there was 100 of something, but I don't know what those things were. Maybe they were computers, maybe they were blades. That sounds about right, I'll just tell him 100. I told him 100, and then he followed up with another question, which was even more technical than the previous one. And at this point I knew I was screwed, because I'd already kind of half-baked the first answer, and I had no idea what the answer of the question was. And so after a while I did kind of tell him, well, I'm not sure, I'll have to speak to my friend who still works there and I can find out for you. And he sort of just like nodded his head a bit and walked off. And I had this overwhelming sensation that he thought I was stupid. And unfortunately, this was one of the rare studios that, for whatever reason, I didn't get called back to. And I always felt like this whole back and forth might have been a part of that, because that was one of the rare opportunities that I got to speak to somebody who was a bit higher up in the company. And it was pretty much one of his only interactions with me. And I guess it wasn't really a great one. He probably came out of that thinking I was stupid. And unfortunately, he didn't actually see any of the creative work that I'd done, so his only experience of me was that interaction. In retrospect, what I should have said was, I'm not 100% sure, but I still have contacts there. If you're curious, I can ask them and we can get the specifics for you. Why didn't I just say that to begin with? And honestly, he probably would have been fine with that. I could have messaged my friend, found out the answers that he wanted, and then gave them to him, and everybody would have been happy. But I didn't. And so what I learned is just saying, you know what, I'm not sure, but I'll find out, is a perfectly acceptable answer. Nobody's expecting you to know everything. And this doesn't just apply to super technical questions, it applies to creative stuff too. Sometimes I was asked to do stuff that I didn't really know how to do. And eventually I learned that just saying I don't really know how to do that was an acceptable answer. And I learned that artists are incredible people. They're more than happy to share the information if they've got it. And this is how I ended up learning a bunch of new skills. Because every time I was asked to do something I didn't know how to do, I just told them, you know what, yes, I've done many things, this is one of the things that I haven't done, could somebody explain it to me? And they always do. This leads me on to point number 2. Don't be a doormat. As much as being honest is great, sometimes you'll be asked to do way too much stuff, and if you just say yes to everything, that's not really a healthy approach to build your career either. You need to make sure that you've got boundaries and that people respect the fact that you're a human with your own life. As the saying goes, you teach people how to treat you. And although you feel like saying yes to everything is super helpful, it's not always the case. Early on, I thought that saying yes to everything was how I could prove my value. But all that meant was I ended up working more hours, more quick favors, and it didn't really build me any more respect. All it ended up doing was burning me out, making me feel uncomfortable and anxious, and making me feel more stressed. And that kind of ended up reflecting in the work that I did, because I felt a need to rush everything through, and I was producing potentially slightly less quality work, but just in a higher volume. And this wasn't really great for anybody. So after some time, I learned that saying no was a professional skill in and of itself. And it doesn't mean you have to just say no to everything or fight back on every little comment. But there's a way that you can navigate around doing things that you shouldn't really be doing in the first place, but doing it professionally. So pushing back on some things is perfectly fine, as long as you do it in a professional way. Don't just start arguments or fistfights. And some of the best artists that I know, with the most experience, were really good at this. They were very good at pushing back on things that they didn't have time for, explaining why they couldn't do them, and then finding a different solution for the issue. And that leads me on to point 3, which is take risks. And speaking of taking risks, I've always been quite an open person, so I've always been open to discussing things that maybe studios wouldn't want us discussing. And even having this YouTube channel is a risk for me, because a lot of the information that I talk about and share is stuff that some studios don't really want you to know. And I'm not saying there's some evil group inside the VFX industry that wear hooded cloaks and sacrifice goats while talking about how to get rid of the troubled people. But at the same time, there's a lot of companies who capitalize on people not having this information and not knowing what they're worth. Because at the end of the day, some companies don't really want you to know your true worth. So when I talk about things like salary or how to improve your career, there are some places that won't like the fact that I'm sharing this. So I am taking a risk in even making these videos, because potentially I could get blacklisted from those companies. So I ask for one small favor in return. If you could like and subscribe to this video, for free, mind you, that would be awesome. And it will help me get exposure, so if I do get blacklisted from some companies, I can find work in other companies. Always getting myself in trouble. So speaking of taking risks, I don't mean go and skydive or take up some extreme sports. I mean, there's certain things that you can do that seem risky, but can help your career grow a lot. So for example, a risk that I've taken a few times is leaving a safe job that I've gotten everything out of in pursuit of freelancing and learning more things. Early in my career, I had a fixed stream of regular long-term contracts at a studio. And at a certain point, I realized that I needed to venture out and learn how to do VFX work, because I was doing a lot of animation work and there was huge gaps in my knowledge that I needed to fill. So when one of my early contracts came to an end, I took the time out to learn software that would help me steer my career in a direction that I could go and do VFX work rather than just sticking in animation. And although it took a long time and it was a bit of a risk because I didn't know if I was going to definitely get a job in VFX, that ended up paying off, because essentially that was the beginning of my freelancing career in the VFX industry, and that has gotten me to where I am today. And I compare myself to what would have happened if I would have just stayed at my first studio, and I can see that the trajectory of my career would have been just completely different. So part of taking a risk is investing in yourself. I don't mean getting a haircut and buying designer clothes. I mean learning new skills, brushing up the skills you already have, buying courses, following YouTube tutorials on things, and becoming the best artist that you can. Every big move in my career came with a calculated risk, and luckily for me, somehow, they all paid off. Then we get to point 4, which is be confident. Early in my career, I thought that being technically good was all that really mattered, but I slowly realized that people care about your personality too. Studios like to rehire people that they enjoy working with, and so if you get along with the people that you work with, your chances of being employed by them increase a little bit. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be super loud or extroverted. As artists, we tend to be an introverted bunch. We tend to sit in dark rooms and make cool creative stuff. Some of you probably sat in a dark room watching this video right now. I see you in there. It's about being someone who communicates clearly, stays calm under pressure, listens well, and makes people feel like they're in safe hands. You could be the most talented artist in the room, but if people hate working with you, there's a chance that you won't get called back for another job. The artists who tend to thrive are the ones who are chill and easy to get along with. Now luckily, I've managed to get along pretty well with most of the artists that I've ever worked with. So going out for a frosty beer on a Friday came naturally to me because I got along really well with these people. And getting to know them better on a personal level helped my work too. Because when I had a question about something or when we would have meetings, I was basically talking to friends. They weren't just colleagues. We had a warmer relationship than just a corporate one. And generally, most artists are really nice to be around. So give yourself some time to warm to them, let them warm to you, and let your personality start to show through. Because at the end of the day, this stuff can help you find work. Unfortunately, after COVID, we tend to work remotely a lot more, so this has become a little bit harder and it feels a bit less personal. Sometimes I do feel like one of those floating bodies in the Matrix with something hooked into the back of me, just getting work done. But at the same time, we are still humans, and humans like working with people they get along well with. So until the AI robots take over and kill us all, we should try and keep some of that personality in there. And that brings me on to my final point. Point number 5, learn to see. Now this doesn't mean go and get laser eye surgery or anything. I should have really named this point understand, but it just doesn't sound quite as sexy. And what I mean by understand is understanding why things look good, not just technically how to make them look good. So essentially it's developing your creative eye and understanding why things look good. And I've got an example of this. A few years into my career, I worked at an architectural visualization studio, and I remember one of the supervisors there coming over to look at my work. And the shot that I was working on at the time was a building set in a wooded area with a lake or something in the background, and it was at night time. So I had made the building look beautiful. There was also some buildings way off in the distance in the back, and I had removed those from the original image and put in some brand new sparkly clean ones. And when we were comparing what I'd done to the reference that we were provided by the client, the supervisor noticed that I changed the buildings in the background and made them look more beautified. But he also recommended that I introduce some of the old stuff back in. I ended up explaining to him that I removed them because some of the stuff didn't really make sense. There was little lights and dots and things back there and obscure shapes that I couldn't quite figure out, so I decided to remove them. So he went on to explain that although it doesn't really make sense or we can't figure out exactly what they are, that's what makes the image look real. The fact that there's some things back there that I can't pinpoint doesn't necessarily make the image look bad, it makes it look more realistic. And I never forgot what he taught me that day, which was that things don't necessarily have to make sense to look real, and things that are too sharp and polished sometimes don't look real. And in the VFX industry, we are guilty of doing that quite a lot. We make things look way too polished and then it ends up looking a bit VFX-y. But if we introduce a little bit of the imperfection back in, it can make things look more real and more aesthetically pleasing. Understanding also applies to studios and clients, because it's not just about the creative work, it's also about understanding their wants and needs from you, the artist. Because if you can fully understand what a client wants, then you can get them there way faster. Even if it doesn't necessarily match with what you think creatively, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's their work that you're trying to produce. And what I tend to do these days is I'll introduce some of my creativity into my work, and then I'll show it to the supervisor as a recommendation, and then we'll find a balance between what the client's after and what I think looks good, and then everybody's happy. So over the years, I learned to develop these skills and bring them all together. And if I could go back and talk to myself before I started in this industry, these are the things that I'd tell myself. Don't say yes to just everything. Take risks, be confident, and learn to see. And I think that would have made my career a lot smoother and filled with a bit less anxiety. So if you found any of this useful, I'd appreciate if you could leave a like. And if you want to know more about what's going on in the VFX industry right now, you can look at my previous video, and although it looks pretty gloomy, it does end with a message of hope. So I'll see you on the next one.